Imagine this. You wake up one day and realize that being a victim feels strangely safe. It gives you a story, a role to play, an excuse to stop fighting. The world feels cruel, unfair, chaotic, and you at least are innocent within it. You suffer, but you suffer righteously. You are the wounded one in a world of monsters. That realization is not comfortable to admit, but it's the quiet truth humming beneath modern life. We have built a culture that rewards fragility, one that finds moral power in pain. To be hurt is to be right. To be offended is to be awake. To be broken is to be pure. We have turned victimhood into virtue, an identity more seductive than power itself. Scroll through social media, and you'll see it everywhere. People competing not for wisdom, but for wounds. We no longer ask, "Who are you?" but "How have you been wronged?" The deeper the pain, the higher the moral ground. The louder the cry, the greater the validation. But somewhere beneath this theater of suffering lies a darker psychological truth. The human mind, once stripped of meaning, craves identity more than freedom. When purpose disappears, pain becomes the next best substitute. The modern self is addicted, not to pleasure, not to truth, but to the comfort of being powerless. This is not new. Throughout history, people have worshipped their chains in different forms: religion, ideology, nationalism, even love. What's different now is how invisible the chains have become. They are woven into our speech, our humor, our art, our politics. We no longer rebel against authority. We beg it to protect us from discomfort. We don't seek strength. We seek sympathy. It's easy to see victimhood in others, but almost impossible to see it in ourselves, because it hides beneath virtue, beneath kindness, beneath the belief that we are simply standing up for what's right. Yet often we are standing still, holding on to our pain like a flag. The question is not whether victimhood exists. It does, and injustice is real. The question is whether we have begun to need it, whether we have turned pain into a performance and trauma into currency. If suffering becomes identity, what happens when it heals? If pain becomes power, what happens when we are happy? Perhaps the more disturbing truth is this: some of us no longer want to heal, because healing would mean losing the only story that makes us special. And so, we remain loyal to our wounds, carefully feeding them, protecting them, polishing them into symbols of who we are. But what if this comfort is the very thing that keeps us from becoming whole? What if freedom means letting go of the only thing that makes us feel real? Victimhood is not just a social phenomenon, it is a psychological ecosystem. Beneath every declaration of pain lies a subtle negotiation between identity and control. When life feels chaotic and the self feels meaningless, victimhood offers a strange kind of order. It says, "You may not be powerful, but at least you are right." The human psyche is addicted to narratives where we are innocent and the world is cruel. Carl Jung would call this a projection of the shadow, the dark, repressed parts of ourselves that we refuse to confront. We place the monster outside so that we don't have to see it within, and so the villain becomes them, the unjust world, the oppressor, the toxic person. But the deeper truth is this: we need villains to keep our sense of goodness alive. This is the hidden problem of modern victimhood. It is not about oppression itself. It is about our attachment to the role of the oppressed. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that resentment, or ressentiment, becomes the moral foundation of societies that have lost strength. When we cannot rise, we redefine weakness as virtue. When we cannot win, we call defeat moral victory. Psychologically, it is the perfect trap. The ego feeds on identity, and identity feeds on story. Victimhood provides both, a story of suffering and an identity built upon endurance. It replaces meaning with moral drama. Every perceived slight becomes a confirmation of who we are. Every failure becomes evidence of injustice. Modern culture reinforces this loop. Our language is soaked in therapy talk and moral outrage. Words like toxic, abuse, and trauma have migrated from psychology into everyday conversation, reshaping how we see ourselves and others. What once described severe psychological wounds now describes the discomfort of being human. We no longer say, "I was hurt." We say, "I was traumatized." The vocabulary of healing has become the currency of identity. In a world where attention equals power, pain becomes performance. The more public the suffering, the more validated the self. Social platforms transform confession into spectacle and empathy into applause. The cycle continues. We express pain to feel seen, but the performance requires more pain to sustain attention. Schopenhauer might have called this the will to suffer, a subconscious drive toward pain when meaning collapses. When we can no longer find purpose through creation, we seek it through injury. The wound becomes proof of existence. Thayer says, "I hurt, therefore I am." But the most tragic part of this psychology is how it quietly removes agency. The moment you identify as a permanent victim, you hand over your freedom. You no longer act, you react. You no longer shape your life. You wait for life to apologize. You stop changing the story, because the story now defines you, Jung once said. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Victimhood culture thrives precisely because we mistake our unconscious need for validation as moral truth. We do not see the subtle pleasure we take in being powerless. This is not to dismiss suffering. It is to see its shadow. For even our pain, when misunderstood, can become an addiction. And in the quiet corners of the mind where no one is watching, that addiction whispers, "Don't heal yet. If you heal, you'll disappear." The tragedy of victimhood culture is not simply that people suffer. It is that they forget how to suffer meaningfully. Pain, once a signal for growth, has been repurposed into a badge of moral identity. The modern mind no longer asks, "What can I learn from this?" It asks, "Who is to blame for this?" And so the human spirit grows weaker, because every time we surrender responsibility, we surrender the chance to evolve. In psychological terms, this is learned helplessness, the quiet erosion of agency. People begin to believe that nothing they do can change their condition, but unlike the experiments where animals give up after repeated shocks, our version is spiritual. We give up not because we are incapable, but because society tells us that to remain broken is noble. Our institutions echo the same message, that happiness is oppressive, success is privilege, and resilience is suspect. The more fragile we become, the more virtuous we appear. The modern conscience confuses sensitivity with morality. We have built an emotional economy where weakness is rewarded with validation, while strength is met with suspicion. On social media, outrage replaces introspection. Algorithms amplify moral injury because suffering keeps people scrolling. Each grievance becomes content, each disagreement a performance. We are not encouraged to understand each other. We are encouraged to wound each other publicly. The crowd does not want dialogue, it wants confession. It demands victims and villains in endless rotation. In such a world, empathy decays into spectacle. Compassion, which once required understanding, now requires visibility. We do not comfort the wounded. We compete to be the wounded. We no longer listen to stories to learn, but to confirm that ours is worse. The collective becomes an orchestra of pain, beautiful, loud, but dissonant. The unseen consequence of this is loneliness. When pain becomes a competition, no one truly connects. Everyone speaks from their wound, but no one hears. The more we cling to our trauma, the less we recognize our shared humanity. Society fractures into fragments of grievance, each convinced of its own moral superiority. And beneath that noise lies an even darker cost: stagnation. When we glorify pain, we stop creating. We stop risking. We stop becoming. The artist hesitates, afraid of being misunderstood. The thinker hesitates, afraid of offending. The individual hesitates, afraid of being labeled privileged for not being broken enough. This paralysis is not progress. It is decay disguised as compassion. Nietzsche would have called it the twilight of the strong, a slow dimming of the human will. When resentment becomes the moral foundation of a culture, greatness becomes impossible. Because greatness requires responsibility, and responsibility feels like guilt to those who have been trained to find power in weakness. In this environment, even genuine victims are betrayed. Their pain becomes diluted by those who mimic suffering for attention. Real trauma is lost in the noise of performative empathy. Healing becomes harder because the culture no longer honors recovery, it honors endurance. The moment you heal, you lose your moral currency. The audience moves on to the next tragedy, and so many people remain stuck, not because they cannot heal, but because healing would mean obscurity. Pain in this new moral economy is the only proof of existence left. The consequence is quiet but devastating. We are building a civilization where people are terrified of becoming whole. They speak endlessly of liberation, but secretly dread the emptiness that freedom brings. Because once the chains are gone, the self has nothing left to hide behind. This is the unseen cost of victimhood culture, a society that worships wounds instead of wisdom. To break free from the gravity of victimhood is to betray a part of yourself. It feels like treason, because for years your pain has been your companion, your identity, your proof of being alive. Letting go of it feels like erasing your story. But liberation always begins with disloyalty to what you once believed was you. The first act of rebellion is not anger, it is awareness. Awareness that your pain is real, but your interpretation of it might be false. You suffered, yes, but that suffering does not make you sacred. It makes you human. The real courage is not in confessing wounds, but in examining what those wounds have taught you. Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To confront the part of you that enjoys being powerless, that secretly feeds on sympathy, is to begin the slow alchemy of selfhood. You start to see that being a victim is not the same as being powerless. The moment you name your suffering, you reclaim it. The story that once held you captive becomes the story you own. This is where the psychology of victimhood ends and the philosophy of freedom begins. But freedom is terrifying because it removes excuses. Without the narrative of injustice, you face the vast question, now what? When there is no one left to blame, your life becomes yours again, and that responsibility feels heavy. Many retreat here, preferring the safety of grievance over the chaos of freedom. To rebel against victimhood, you must be willing to stand alone, misunderstood. Society rarely celebrates those who refuse to perform their pain. When you stop complaining, you become invisible to the culture that thrives on outrage. But in that invisibility lies peace, the kind of silence where the self starts to grow roots again. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, not a superior being, but a self-overcomer. One who transforms resentment into creation, the spirit that says, yes, this happened to me, but now I will build from it. The victim asks, who hurt me? The creator asks, what can I make from this? That shift is everything, because the one who creates no longer needs to accuse. Pain, once used as a shield, becomes a tool. Suffering becomes raw material for meaning. This rebellion is not loud. It does not shout or post or demand. It is quiet. So quiet that modern culture might mistake it for indifference. But it is the silence of someone who has stopped performing and started living. To break free, you must confront the hidden comfort of your wounds. Ask yourself, what would I lose if I stopped suffering? The answer will terrify you, because pain offers clarity and belonging. Freedom offers uncertainty, but uncertainty is the birthplace of all strength. The rebel does not deny injustice. He refuses to build his identity upon it. The rebel does not dismiss pain. He digs through it to find truth. The rebel does not wait for healing. He becomes the healer. And here lies the paradox. Once you no longer need to be seen as a victim, you become someone impossible to control. You no longer fit the script that society has written for you. You stop playing your part in the great theater of grievance. You become dangerous, because a free person cannot be manipulated by pity. Rebellion begins the moment you whisper to your pain, I see you, but you no longer define me. That whisper is quiet, but it's the sound of a soul beginning to wake. Freedom is not a destination. It is a condition of being that must be earned over and over again. When you finally step beyond victimhood, there is no applause, only silence. The same silence that once frightened you now becomes sacred. It is the space where you realize that meaning was never given to you. You were meant to create it. At first, that realization feels cold. You look around and see no one to blame, no one to rescue you, no script to follow. The identity you built around pain dissolves, and what remains is terrifyingly simple: responsibility. The power to respond, the ability to act without waiting for permission from the world that wounded you. The truth is that victimhood is not destroyed by external justice. It is transcended by inner strength. The moment you stop needing your suffering to be validated, it loses control over you. The moment you stop seeking sympathy, you begin to see reality clearly, stripped of the emotional fog that made everything seem crueler than it was. Carl Jung once wrote that no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. To become whole, you must descend into the shadow, face your own bitterness, envy, and helplessness, and accept them as part of yourself. Only then can compassion exist without condescension, strength without cruelty, and love without manipulation. You start to see that pain was never your enemy. It was your teacher. It carved space within you for understanding, depth, and humility. But like all good teachers, it was never meant to stay. The purpose of pain is to awaken consciousness, not to imprison it. When you hold on to suffering after its lesson is complete, it rots into resentment. But when you let it go, it transforms into wisdom. You realize that healing is not forgetting. It is remembering differently. It is seeing that what happened to you is not who you are. It is what shaped you into someone capable of seeing the world as it really is. The truth is not comforting, but it is liberating. No one can truly hurt you anymore because you no longer build your identity from their actions, and so a quiet strength takes root. You begin to act from creation, not reaction. You speak less, but your words weigh more. You seek no approval, because truth itself becomes your ally. You understand that real power is not control, it is presence. The ability to stand in the chaos of existence and say, yes, I am here and I am free. Victimhood culture will not disappear overnight. The world will still reward fragility, outrage, and noise. But you, once awakened, will see through the theater. You will notice the subtle difference between those who suffer and those who perform their suffering. You will choose the former with compassion and the latter with silence. In that silence lies revolution. Because when enough people stop performing pain, the script collapses. The culture built on grievance loses its audience. What remains are individuals, real, flawed, strong, alive. People who have learned that pain is not a crown, but a passage. Not a sentence, but a teacher. The final truth is that freedom is not about forgetting the past. It is about refusing to repeat it within yourself. When you stop identifying with the wound, the world opens again. You start to see beauty where before there was only fear. You start to feel gratitude where before there was only blame. And one day, without even realizing it, you breathe deeply and feel no need to explain yourself. That is the quiet miracle of awakening. You are no longer the story, you are the storyteller.